Hi, I'm Anne-Laure Le Cunff, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and in case this is your first time listening to the show, this is where we have conversations, productive ones at that, where we explore how to build a better relationship with time, with work, and attention, and help you cultivate a state of productiveness. And today, I am absolutely elated to welcome Anne-Laure Le Cunff. She is a neuroscientist, entrepreneur, and the founder of Ness Labs. Ness Labs is an online school that helps curious minds achieve their goals without sacrificing mental health. Now, after leaving Google and experiencing the ups and downs of startup life, Anne-Laure pivoted to studying the neuroscience of learning and curiosity at King's College in London. Along the way, she's built a thriving community of over 100,000 newsletter subscribers. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, make that happen. You can find a link to that in the show notes. And she's established herself as a leading voice in mindful productivity. She's got a book out, coming out literally just before she's got a book out. It's her new book. Now, her book, Tiny Experiments, How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World, was just released as we unveil this podcast episode, although the episode was recorded while the book was still in its pre-launch phase. This book, now, it challenges the way we think about goals, about habits and progress. And we're going to dive really deep into the power of small strategic experiments. We actually are going to get into the idea of how curiosity can fuel creativity. And, we get a little bit into rethinking productivity for a more sustainable and fulfilling life. There's a lot more that I can share with you as we lead up to the conversation, but let's just get to the conversation. Here it is. My conversation with Anne-Laure Le Cunff. Enjoy. Anne-Laure, thanks so much for taking the time to join me. You've got a lot going on right now with your book, Tiny Experiments. I've got it here. You can see I've got my Green Lantern notes in here. How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
So, I have been waiting for a book from you for a long time. I've read Ness Labs for years. For those of you that don't know, Ness Labs is first off, I think it's one of the best written, quote, productivity, I'll put that in air quotes, kind of blogs, websites out there. Your articles are incredibly deep, but they're also, what I love about the way you write is that it's really accessible, which means that, it doesn't go too far over people's heads. You explain the science, you go into some of the stuff that kind of supports what you're saying and writing about, but you don't do it in a way that, people can't really grasp. How important is that for you when you're not only just writing for your website, but when you were putting it in the book, because it's transferred quite well into Tiny Experiments? So how important and how have you cultivated that style of writing over the years?
I mean, that's the core of everything I do at Ness Labs, and that's what matters the most to me when I write, really. I initially started the Ness Labs newsletter because I wanted to better understand what I was studying and my neuroscience graduate studies. So every week I take a concept I discovered, a new idea, and I write about it. And very often this idea is actually quite new to me as well. And writing is a way for me to better understand it. So it's actually kind of a selfish process when I think about it, where I'm taking something I'm curious about. I use the newsletter almost as an excuse for me to go a little bit deeper. And I learn in the process. And for the book, it was the same, where a lot of those ideas were things that I had been thinking about for a very long time, writing the newsletter, but a lot of the material is new as well. So I also used the book as a way for myself to learn more about myself, about the world, and about scientific research.
Well, one of the things and when we have these conversations, we generally jump all over the place in this book because it's a conversation. It's not like it's linear or anything like that, which is kind of the way that, it's funny. You mentioned writing. That's kind of the way I do it too, I'll give you a great example. I was driving home today after dropping off my wife at work, and there's a singer named Burton Cummings. I don't know if you know who that is, but the band The Guess Who, they sang the song American Woman. So
Yeah.
he has this amazing voice, but he did a solo career. And there's a song he sings called "I'm Scared." And it's about religion, it's about faith. But there's a part in the song where he sings "Sleep in Heavenly Peace." It's part of it's a completely original song, but that very small portion, he sings exactly how you would sing Silent Night. And my brain went, "Oh, there's familiarity there." I wonder if that's where he started with the song. I wonder if he got, and of course I'm driving, so I'm like, I have to focus on this, but I also like the creative part of my brain is going with, and I find that writing is a way of experimenting. And it's, to me, and you talk about this in the book, the idea of small, low risk experiments. And to me, writing for your newsletter, writing for the blog, that's an example of that. Can you give some examples for those that are either watching live right now or those that are listening, some examples of some low risk experiments that maybe people who aren't writers like us can kind of dive into?
Yeah, you can experiment with literally anything in your life. That can be your work, that can be your health, that can be your relationships. So, if like a work experiment, for example, could be I'm going to block 1 hour every Monday just to read and do research. I'm actually not allowed to write anything. I'm just going to read and I'm going to fall into a rabbit hole. And I have 1 hour blocked every Monday to do this and try this for maybe the next month. One in for your health could be I'm going to go for a walk for 20 minutes for the next 20 days, every day. And I'm going to see what happens. In your relationships, that could be I'm going to have a date with my spouse every Friday for the next 3 months. And maybe we'll alternate. Sometimes I'm organizing, sometimes they're organizing, and we're just swapping and seeing what happens. So it's really just about when you think about what an experiment is, it's really all about starting from something you're curious about, having a little bit of a research question, a hypothesis, and then choosing an action that you're going to repeat for a certain number of trials, just like in a scientific experiment, and withholding judgment until you're done collecting the data.
Right, right. You talk about repeated trials in the book. In fact, you mention a mutual friend and somebody who's been on the podcast before, Kay He from Rad Reads, and the idea of repeated trials. And I think this is where I believe, and I know you feel the same way, where people can get stuck is that they either give up too early or they don't give it enough time. When I was doing acting and comedy, we used to have here in Victoria a room that we rented that we would do sketch comedy, like Saturday Night Live kind of stuff. And the the person that was running the event or the space said, you can have it for 4 weeks. And we were like, we need it for 12 because 4 weeks isn't enough time for the audience to learn that we're there, for us to get our kind of our feet underneath ourselves. Do you think that, like, for someone who wants to do something like this and practice some tiny experiments, I've got a follow-up question to this, but we'll start with this, is how do you decide how long that repetition needs to be? And when do you know that it's kind of, okay, this is enough and I can use this as my baseline or my benchmark for future tiny experiments?
Yeah, so this is highly dependent on the action that you're choosing to experiment with. So obviously, if you're going to write a weekly newsletter, 1 week is not going to be enough for you to know whether you enjoy it and whether people enjoy reading it. So you might want to go for 6 weeks or 8 weeks at least in order for you to collect enough data. If you go for the example I gave you earlier of the daily walk, maybe a couple of weeks is enough. So really try to kind of like have a reasonable amount of time, a reasonable number of repetitions based on the action itself.
Right.
That's number one. Number two is that I have found that in general, people actually tend to go for something that is a little bit too big, a little bit too ambitious. And that's why I named the book Tiny Experiments, because I want to encourage people to just start with something small. You don't have to go with a really big one. If you want to experiment with starting a YouTube channel, you don't have to say, I'm going to publish 3 times a week for the next year. You could say, I'm going to publish once a week for the next couple of months and just see what happens. And so if you're hesitating in between two potential durations, just go for the smaller one, because what's really important is to finish collecting the data,
Mm-hmm.
to complete the experiment. so you can then evaluate what worked and what didn't. So in doubt, go tiny.
Well, and James Clear's talked about this in Atomic Habits, this idea of going small, breaking down projects to the smallest particles, or some of the things I talk about. Actually, Gloria Jean, who is a member of our Time Crafting Trust community, she mentions we have this initiative right now called 25 and 25. So taking the Pomodoro technique and taking one of those 25-minute increments, if that's what you're going to do, and just use it for something, again, tiny, small, consistent, that you can do again. You can do it for your entire year, 25 minutes of something, right? Whether it's reading. Right now, we have a Japanese international student living with us. So if I spend 25 minutes a day just practicing Duolingo or something like that, or Lingoda, which is another language model, going to those classes, bit by bit. It's this bit by bit stuff. Why do you think people struggle so much with the bit by bit, with the tiny, with the atomic, rather than just embracing it?
Because we want to feel like we're making progress as fast as possible. And especially the kind of people who are interested in improving their productivity. They want to have the most efficient way of going about things. They want to really feel this progress. But when you look at the more interesting kind of projects that you could be working on, that's what's interesting, is that it's really hard to feel the progress. It's like going to the gym. You don't go to the gym once and then look at yourself in the mirror and expect to see any change, right?
Right.
It happens bit by bit. And it's the same with writing a newsletter, with starting a YouTube channel, with any kind of creative project. You're not going to have any one of those actions that's going to make a really big change. Same with any kind of work you're doing. And if you're experimenting, even with the way you manage your time, with going to bed at the same time every evening, going for walks, literally anything, you're not going to see changes just by doing it one time. So I completely understand the desire to go big, to do one big action once and then see this massive change in your life.
Right.
But in reality, that's not really how it works.
Well, and I think the other interesting thing is that if we end up not falling victim to the trying to do things too big, we try to do too many at once. So that's the other fallback, right? Is, oh, I'm going to do 23 tiny experiments at the same time. Actually, it's funny. Tim, who is a member of our community, he says, it's necessary to finish the experiment. Easier said than done if you have a touch of impatience in your head. By the way, if anybody who is a premium member that's in the YouTube chat right now wants to ask questions, feel free to throw them in there. But I'd like to circle back to this, what Tim is saying, and what, the idea of having too many of them going on at once. How do you keep yourself from doing that?
Yeah, again, just go for, I really recommend, if your first time doing this, just do one experiment, at most 2 experiments, and especially if they're in 2 completely different areas of your life. So you could have one work experiment and one health experiment, that's fine. But you really want, I love how Tim was like, oh, if you're impatient, you really want to complete the experiment. So go with a duration that is reasonable and with a number of experiments that is reasonable as well. You want to collect that data and be able to look at all of it and evaluate whether you want to keep going with this experiment, whether you want to tweak the parameters, whether you want to completely abandon it. But for this, you need data. So you need to complete it. So whenever you feel like you're pushing yourself, that you're going for something that's very ambitious, that is not the way to go.
Right.
Just go with the smaller version.
The other thing, and you bring this up in the chapter on the power of intentional imperfection, is this idea of perfectionism, which comes up a lot. And it's only recently, again, speaking of experimenting and ideas and stuff, the idea of being perfect versus perfecting. And I think that is a switch that's hard for people to flip, because I don't think you can perfect things, again, if you're doing too many or if they're too big. But the idea of intentional imperfection, can you go into that a little bit deeper?
Yeah, it's really just embracing the fact that you cannot be absolutely perfect across everything, across the board in your life and in your work. So whenever you're trying to be 100% somewhere, you are going to be below 100% in another area of your life. And for a lot of people, this is something that they resist. they try to fix, they feel like something's wrong, or even worse, they blame themselves if they feel like they can't be 100% at work and they can't be 100% as a spouse, as a partner, as a parent. And you really need to just accept the fact you cannot be 100% across the board, and you can be strategic about this.
Right.
You can be intentional. That's intentional imperfection. That's saying, okay, let me look at my calendar this week and let me decide where I am going to aim for near perfection. Let's say there is this very important presentation that we're doing in front of one of our biggest clients on Thursday. Maybe that's where I should aim for near perfection this week. But because of that, maybe I won't be able to be as present at home. So maybe I'll just let my spouse know, I'm so sorry in advance, but this week I have this big thing at work and I'll make it up to you. But for this week, I will be very focused on this. And I know I'm not going to be the best spouse in the world. And I might be a little bit stressed. And I might not be fully present, but this is just for this week. And I'm being intentional about it. And I'm communicating. And I'm also not blaming myself for not being able to be perfect across the board.
I want to circle back to the PACT stuff that you talk about, a PACT turning doubts into experiments. You also talk about imposter syndrome. There's a lot in here. And I want to make sure that people pick up the book when they, obviously Tim says he's had it for pre-order since January. So it's exciting. It's got to be exciting for you. Even, were you doing tiny experiments with the book itself as you were going through the writing process?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I tried lots of experiments while I was writing. I'm a scientist, so this is how I test ideas. And even with the writing, I experimented with the time of the day, with the amount of writing that I would do, with the process of writing. I even tried sometimes writing on a notebook for a little while just to see if the writing would be different if I didn't have direct access to the internet. So I experimented a lot. And I still haven't found the perfect writing routine,
No.
but I'm getting there and I'm keeping on tweaking. This is part of it too with this experimental mindset, is that you're not necessarily trying to get to this perfect system. You're really, again, it's the keyword of intentionality. You're trying to be intentional and you're trying to you keep on collecting data, you look at it, you keep on tweaking, and you trust that your systems will keep on improving if you're intentional like that.
Well, one of the things that I appreciate about your work is that you are taking a scientific approach to productivity in a way that takes quantitative data and applies it so that you can actually deal with more qualitative, action and output. Because I think that's part of in this productivity oriented world, it's a lot about get as many things done as possible as opposed to the right things or doing fewer things better. And there's an imbalance between quantity and quality when it comes to this. Tim actually, and I think this is what you were alluding to, I'll throw it up on here again, but this near perfection idea. So Tim's question can be kind of phrased two ways. What is near perfection? And also, does Tim struggle with this idea of deciding what near perfection is to him? Because to me, there's got to be nuance there, right?
Absolutely. This is really about figuring out what is your own definition of success. This is something I talk a lot about in the book. An issue a lot of us have when we're trying to be successful, to be productive, to accomplish something is that we might turn to other people's ways of doing this and try to copy paste those frameworks, those methods, and whatever worked for them, feeling like it will work for us. And when that's not the case, again, we blame ourselves. We feel like, oh, that worked for so many people. Why isn't it working with me? I'm doing something wrong. And that's the same with perfection. My definition of perfection in certain areas is not going to be the same one as it is for you. So just to give you an example, I don't really cook. I make myself some salads. That's the whole extent of it. And if you see me cutting some tomatoes and making myself a salad, you can please clap because that doesn't happen that often.
That'll be on the next episode.
Yeah.
Cooking with Anne-Laure.
Oh yeah. If I publish a cooking book, please call me up.
I will be like, what are you doing?
But I have a really good friend of mine. He's featured in the book actually called Valentin. He took some cooking classes and he's what perfection is for him in terms of cooking is really much higher than it is for me. He has much higher standards when it comes to the kind of food that he prepares, and especially if he's making food for others. But he doesn't care that much about writing, for example. And so if he needs to write an email, he will sit down, he will send the email, and he hits send. Whenever I write an email, I reread it 5 times because I want to make sure it's perfect. And some people might say, you're wasting so much time and mental energy rereading your emails, making sure they're perfect. And I'll tell them, no, actually, because I consider myself a writer, and it's important to me that I'm communicating my ideas in a way that is clear and where it really matches what I'm trying to convey here. And so that's my definition of near perfection here. So in the case of Tim's question, I would just encourage him and anyone who has a similar question to make a little bit of space, sit down maybe. If you like journaling or taking notes, you can do that in your note-taking app and take that question, write it down, and spend a little bit of time free writing, thinking about what is perfection to me, what is near perfection in those different areas of my life that I care about.
And journaling is a huge help with that. I think a lot of people need to, because when you're, as a scientist, you're recording data, you are chronicling what's going on. And it's funny because the average Joe or the average Jill is looking at their to-do list and they're just checking off things. And then once they're done, they're gone. Like they're not looking back at, doing in the military, the after action reports, or they're not doing anything like that. They're just going, well, what's next? What's next? What's next? But if you keep doing the what's next and it's the wrong next, then that's a problem, right? So it's funny. You mentioned the cooking aspect of it. For you, it's a means to an end. I need to eat. I will make this thing and I will eat. For Valentin, it's like this is his passion, his calling. It's the human part. And I think that a lot of productivity asks us to do things in an inhumane or inhuman way, as opposed to kind of tapping in, because to your point, you want the email to be perfect, but you're not going to get it perfect for anyone but you. Somebody reading it would go, well, this is not my version of perfect. So once I think you wrap your head around that, I think that's where it opens things up for you, and you can kind of remove yourself from this grip of I need to do things as quickly as possible. You get the right idea about what efficiency is, as opposed to what some people think it is, and it's just that experimentation, it has to play a role in this. So if somebody wants to get started with, like, what's a tiny experiment that somebody could do, let's say, at work, and then one they could do at home that might be something that just lights the flame.
Yeah, I love how you say what could light the flame, because I would actually start taking a little step back and I would start with observation, just like a scientist. And again, I know, especially if we're into trying to be as productive as possible, we want to get things done. We want to get to the designing my experiment, running the test, collecting the data part. But if you want to design a really good experiment that is actually going to be meaningful to you and helping you make better decisions in your life, start from observation. Little exercise that you can do is pretend for 24 hours that you are an anthropologist, except that instead of studying a new culture, you're studying your own life as your topic of study. Pretend that you know nothing about your life. You're someone external, this anthropologist coming with their notebook and just taking notes. You can do that in lots of different ways, just observing the conversations that you have, what gives you energy, what drains your energy. You can look at your calendar, see how you spend your time, and you can ask yourself questions like, why do people in this culture, which in this case is your life, why do they care about these things? And why are they spending their time in this way? And why is this thing more important to them than this thing? Really questioning a lot of the assumptions that are driving the decisions that you're making in your daily life. Based on that, you can start formulating some research questions. Okay, we seem to care a lot about this, but what if for a few weeks we didn't actually? What if we stopped caring about this? What would happen? Or we've been doing this thing exactly at the same time every day for the past years. What if for a few weeks we did it at a different time? What would that look like? So you can start having those research questions, and based on that, you can design a tiny experiment. That can be in your work, that can be in your personal life, that can be really with anything. And so instead of recommending a specific tiny experiment that you can do, I would recommend to start from a place of observation and then start asking yourself, what could be different? And that's a good place to start.
want to be respectful of your time as well. And there's lots of things we can talk about. Generative adventures. There's a whole bonus resource about mind gardening that is basically, it could be its own book in a lot of ways. There's so many things in here that you could be the next thing. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure that I get to these core questions that I ask every guest. So the first one, and this, again, you could do it rapid fire. You can think a little bit about it. You kind of, as I would expect you to reflect on it based on the kind of work that you do. But how has your relationship with time evolved over the years? So when you're thinking about how time and the work that you do, how's it evolved? And can you think of any shifts that have helped you work more effectively with time rather than fight it? Is there anything there that you can think on?
Yeah, I know I should pretend that I'm thinking deeply about this, but I literally published a video about this very question last year, and I have an entire chapter in the book about a relationship to time. So I actually have had a lot of time, very meta, to think about this.
Okay.
So yeah, my relationship has changed a lot. I used to really treat time as this quantity that I had to manage in the most efficient way possible. Like, there's this visual in the book that shows all of those tiny boxes that I really wanted to fill with as much stuff as possible. And that was what gave me a sense of productivity. And now my relationship to time has shifted from this quantitative approach to a more qualitative one. I try, oh, thank you.
There it
Yes, you're
is.
showing
Yeah, it's the wait but why, thing, right? From
Exactly.
Tim
So
Urban.
I mentioned in the
Yeah.
book that this is the first time I saw it was when Tim Urban posted it in, I think, 2014.
Yep.
And it's all of those tiny boxes. And it creates this kind of time anxiety where you just want to fill all of these boxes and be productive. And now, instead, I ask myself, what exactly do I want to put in this box? And I also realized that some boxes are not the same size as the others. And we all have actually had this experience where, when you sit down with a friend and you just start talking about random stuff, and then you look at the time and you're like shocked because, wow, it's been 3 hours already and we completely lost track of time, right? It's as if time can contract and expand depending on the current experience that you have. And so now I'm really trying to optimize my time for those more expensive experiences. That's what I'm optimizing for rather than just trying to do as much, like fill those with random stuff and as many tasks as possible. That's how my relationship with time has evolved.
What's a system, practice, or mindset shift that's had the biggest impact on your ability to finish that meaningful work that you do?
I think incorporating pauses and breaks and using those breaks to just check in with myself. I used to just have a list of tasks and kind of like plow through them and really using willpower to be as effective and productive as possible. Whereas now I'm really paying attention to the signals that my brain and my body are sending me. And so if I'm sitting in front of the computer and I've become a lot better at noticing that it's been 5 minutes I'm staring at the screen and not doing much. And I used to be pretty bad at noticing these things. And so I think this practice of just having breaks, having pauses, making sure that I'm not back to back with my meetings, that I always have a little bit of time to stretch, to check in, and also being okay with moving tasks around, moving meetings around when I can do that, being a lot more flexible and fluid in my approach to work. So in a way, I know you used the word system, but I've become more systematic in not in kind of removing some of the rigidity that you
More of
have around those.
more of an approach than a system.
Exactly, more of an approach than a system.
Yeah. Side question really quickly. So you mentioned that you did use willpower. Do you believe that I'm a big fan of will. I think will does play a role in a lot of this, but there's a lot of talk out there that will doesn't really, we don't have it and so on and so forth. And what are your thoughts on will and willpower? I mean, because I think it does play a role when it comes to doing these kind of experiments as well.
No, absolutely. But to me, if you want to be able to maintain your motivation and your will for a very long-term project, you have to think about the long term and the short term. And it's very important to take breaks throughout the day in order to be able to keep going and work on a project for a year plus, like writing this book, which took me a very long time. So you need to be able to zoom in and zoom out when it comes to applying your will to a project.
And I think that's the tricky part, is that it's the pause to zoom in and zoom out. We kind of are wrapped up in a society, at least in the Western world, where pauses are seen as, I think it's changing a bit, but pauses are seen as, why are you stopping? Like, what are you doing? You should just keep going. And I mean, we're not machines, right? Um, so if you had to strip down the approach to you being productive and how you are productive to just one core principle, I think we've touched on it a little bit here. Something that you would rely on if everything else disappeared. Say you didn't have anything else. What is one core principle that you could always rely on that would keep you being productive? What is it, and why would it be the thing that would keep you going?
It would be default to curiosity. And the reason why is that anytime I'm facing a challenge, every time I'm procrastinating, every time I feel like I'm demotivated, instead of just blindly pushing through or blaming myself or having self-judgment, if I look at the problem with curiosity, usually I manage to figure out what's wrong and I manage to find a solution. But it always starts from replacing the self-blame and the self-judgment with pure curiosity.
I want to see if you can help Janet out here. So Janet says, I'm still hesitant to put my artwork out in the world. And Janet, I'm just going to put it out there and put you and Laura a little bit on the spot, because there's been a lot of conversation around this inside of the chat. We often have members of our community that are sharing things, like Tim shares his poems. Gloria Jean has shared her artwork. There's a bunch of people. Pete has shared his photography. So for Janet, who is, again, still hesitant to put her artwork out in the world, what kind of tiny experiment would you recommend for her to do to feel that she could start to do that a bit more?
Yeah, so there are several ways you could approach this. One approach is, before sharing your artwork, maybe you could share other things that you feel more comfortable sharing. So that could be your sources of inspiration, ideas, work from other artists that you found was interesting, and just practicing just the habit of putting yourself out there, putting your ideas out there, and having those interactions with other people on the internet without the fear of your own artwork being judged. That can be a small step, and saying, every week I'm going to share artwork that I found that was inspiring to me. And then once you feel ready, maybe you can add to that your own artwork and say, here's also something that I made. So that's one way you can start. Another approach from a different angle also that I talk about in the book is just thinking about how the levels of being public, right? It can be very public. Like, you could be posting on Instagram on a public account that absolutely everybody can see, or you can start from somewhere that's more semi-public. So maybe you join some of those private WhatsApp groups for artists, or
Right.
maybe you do it in a private community, like yours, for example. And maybe you start from that, where it feels a little bit safer because you are with peers who are supportive, who are already curious about the kind of things that you want to share. And again, once you feel ready, once you've built up the courage, maybe you open the playground a little bit more, you expand it a little bit more, and you start including more and more strangers. But you're ready because you have built this muscle of sharing and learning in public already.
Well, and I think some social media platforms are ideal for this too, because like Instagram, you can archive if you're like, you put it out there, because these things are like rivers, they flow by. So it's not like you're putting it, in one place where it'll be static. It's very dynamic, right? Pinterest, that'd be a great place for artwork, I think, because then you can share that and people can pin it and you can get sent. Again, you're getting, to your point, data, like how many people, but inside the community for sure, because we have a lot of people that post that stuff there. So I wanted to kind of give a real world example to one of the people that are watching this live right now and that are listening to the podcast as well. So thank you so much for that, Anne-Laure. That will wrap up there. There are so many more things we could get into. I'm so glad, number one, that we had the chance to have this conversation today. Number two, got to see you present at the Second Brain Summit by Tiago Forte. Some great stuff there. I know I've shared a couple of those pictures of slides on social media. There was a lot of great stuff there. There's so much alignment with the work that we do. So I'm really happy that we finally had the chance to connect and have you on the show here. The book, as of right now, as of watching this video, we're 3 weeks away from it be going up, right? But
3, 4 weeks.
3,
Yeah.
4 weeks. But the day this episode goes live will be the day after the book is released. So the book is called Tiny Experiments: How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World. Pick up the physical book so you can do the kind of stuff I do with it, which is putting a bunch of, folding corners and all that stuff. Or wherever, go wherever you want to get the book. But where can people get the book? And where can people keep up with the work that you're doing?
The book is available literally anywhere books are sold. So you can either look it up online on any website and you'll find it there, or you can take a little walk to your local bookstore and support your local bookstore as well and order the book there. And if you want to read my newsletter, which I send every Thursday, you just go to nesslabs.com, enter your email address, and then you'll hear from me every week about the kind of topics that we discussed today.
Anne-Laure, thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to Anne-Laure for joining me on the podcast. You can find all the show notes at mikevardy.com/podcast595 or wherever you get your podcast. Wherever you're listening to this right now, maybe it's Spotify. Leave a comment if it's in Spotify. That way you can tell me what you thought of the show. Apple Podcasts is another, YouTube, Overcast. There are plenty of places where you can get your podcasts. And while you are checking out where you can get this podcast and listening to it right now, subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode of what's to come. Subscribing to the podcast, great way to keep up with the show and hear great guests like this one and great conversations like this one as well. Another way to support the show is to check out the sponsors that you heard mentioned during this conversation. Go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors. Check out any of those that resonate with you, and that way they know that we sent you and it helps support the show. That's it for this episode. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.